I knew I was in for a war the moment my helicopter was airlifted off my own backyard. Yes, airlifted by order of the HOA president, who then had the nerve to send me an invoice and a handwritten note that read, "Maybe now you'll mow your lawn properly." I was 800 meters away on a medevac mission, literally saving someone's life, and these suburban rulers decided my legally permitted aircraft was a menace to community tranquility. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding, this was personal. I picked this place because of the clearing in the back, the kind of patch of sky that feels like a private runway, the kind of place you buy when you want to keep your life loud and wide and true. I'm a licensed pilot, ex-military. I fly medevac and contract runs the helicopter. It's not a hobby, it's my work and sometimes someone's lifeline. The FAA was fine with it, the county was fine with it, the HOA, however, thought otherwise. At first it was passive-aggressive paperwork, a note taped to my fence. Aircraft should not be landing in residential areas. Another in the mailbox about disrupted nesting birds. I adjusted my approach path to avoid spooking deer. I flew daylight only twice a week by the book. But Becky, the HOA president, clipboard-wielding sunglasses, permanent rule-obsessed Becky treated my aircraft like a declaration of war. At a meeting, she stood up theatrically indignant and said, "There is an aircraft regularly entering our skies without HOA approval. We don't know what it's carrying. For all we know, it could be filming our children." People gasped. I stood and said calm as I could, "That's mine. I'm FAA certified and I've saved 3 people this year alone with that threat." She blinked and told me our neighborhood wasn't zoned for ego. I expected drama. I didn't expect outright sabotage. One weekend I was delayed on a transplant run. I left the helicopter on its pad with a note and emergency contact. 3 days later I came home to an empty slab, scraped concrete, ruined grass, and in the mailbox an invoice from a private recovery company 2 counties over. It listed pickup time, hauling fee weight, and bore Becky's inked signature, authorized by HOA, due to code violations. I stared at that signature until I laughed, the kind of laugh you get when you're both terrified and incredulous. She had my helicopter towed like a misparked SUV and charged me for the indignity. The FAA rep I spoke to tried not to laugh into the phone. My cousin Jason, the adrenaline junkie lawyer who loves grudges as much as loopholes, said Becky had stumbled into federal territory with both feet, removing an aircraft from private property without owner consent or aviation authority. That's not a parking ticket. It's a legal minefield with propeller blades. When I confronted Becky in front of witnesses, she shrugged and called it a safety removal the board had voted. Safety concerns outweighed my hobby. Not a hobby, I told her, a licensed airframe. She smiled like she'd won and said, "Maybe now we'll all get some peace and quiet." Peace and quiet, she said. That planted the seed. Helicopters are noisy, sure, but they're also surgical. They hover, they carry, they can place things very precisely. If someone were determined to make a point, and if that someone acquired the right biodegradable payload from a generous farmer, well, you can imagine where my thoughts went. I wasn't proud of the idea. At first I was planning legal steps and paperwork. Jason filed complaints with the FAA and county. I drove to the impound lot and walked up to my chopper sitting dusty among forgotten equipment, and then the plan found its teeth. I signed the release, carefully inspected every rotor and wire, and flew her home. Once she was back, Becky had given me something more potent than offense. She'd given me motive. I scoured classifieds and farm forums and found a manure spreader attachment designed for agricultural drones and small helicopters. A wiry farmer named Gus sold it to me with a crooked grin and an extra scoop. "You ain't dropping this on crops, are you?" he asked. "Let's just say it's for a special delivery," I said. He slapped his knee. "Well, damn, I'll throw in straw." Timing mattered. Word got around that the HOA was planning an open-air quarterly meeting, folding chairs, banners, a catered lunch, and Becky had invited State Senator Blevins to witness how model our neighborhood was. Dropping a payload within 20 feet of an elected official would be a legal and PR disaster. So I adapted Cardboard Becky. I built a life-size cutout with oversized shades, a cartoon clipboard, staked it where the ritual would be. I tested hover and release, locked GPS coordinates, added fail-safes, rehearsed until the drop would be surgical and symbolic without being dangerous. I added a camera to the rig to document the whole thing. This wasn't just revenge, it was evidence. Saturday was ridiculous with sunshine. Becky perched at the podium like she was crowning herself mayor. The senator smiled politely, folding chairs filled. I hovered at legal altitude, feeling equal parts ridiculous and righteous. I armed the release and thought, for every clipboard tyrant who forgets that rules protect people and not egos. I flipped the switch. The bucket swung open and manure rained down in a glorious arc, flattening the cardboard idol in a smelly, straw-filled explosion. Chairs toppled. Reporters gasped. Becky screamed loud enough to register on my headset. The senator shielded himself with a folder as if under siege. People covered their noses and laughed and cried angry at once. Jason called me before I landed. "Viral brother," he said. 15,000 views in 20 minutes. Legally, you're fine. Morally, you're a folk hero. The sheriff came by, later watched the footage, and left with an amused, "That's actually impressive." Becky filed complaints, sure, but with FAA logs, GPS, and footage showing no one was injured and no public property damaged. Her legal thunder didn't have much bite. The video racked up 500,000 views. Local media ran headlines that made me blush and grin. Suburban Watergate, the fertilizer rebellion memes blossomed overnight. People sent messages, pilots, homeowners fed up with petty rule-keeping, even one guy from Arizona holding a compost control freedom sign. Here's the unexpected twist nobody saw coming. The senator's office called not to scold, but oddly to say how the whole mess forced a conversation about community power and the difference between rules and rulers. And Derek, the quiet neighbor who mentioned the senator in passing, turned out to be an ally. He hosted a backyard fire pit with 20 reasonable people who'd had enough of Becky's dictatorship. They read my FAA correspondence, watched the tapes, and by week's end, the HOA inboxes flooded with resignation demands. Becky had a public meltdown at her farewell meeting. She called me a man with a flying toilet bowl on camera, and the new board voted her out. Justice felt clean, not because of shame, but because the neighborhood remembered how to talk to one another again. Meetings turned into conversations about sidewalks and real improvements, not witch hunts over hummingbird feeders. Kids rode bikes without someone measuring chalk lines. Neighbors waved when I taxied past the park. I never ran for president of the HOA. I didn't need to. People asked me to consult about airspace and common sense instead. The FAA even sent a cheeky note, a novelty certificate about creative aerial outreach, which we hung in the garage for the laughs. If there's a moral, it's the one that settled in slow and quiet like dust after a rotor wash. Authority without humility is just noise and rules that become weapons against your neighbors. Stop serving anyone. Becky forgot that enforcement is a stewardship, not a crown. When systems meant to protect become instruments of petty vengeance, people will invent strange, messy ways to remind those in power of their place, sometimes with law, sometimes with creativity, sometimes with fertilizer and a camera. The helicopter still sits in the backyard, the helipad accepted now as a neighborhood oddity. Kids wave when I lift off. Someone painted a helipad mural on a shed roof that says, "Land here if Becky returns." I don't plan on dropping anything from the sky again, not because I can't, but because I learned that a single moment of creative resistance said more than 1,000 hours of griping ever would. Still, there's comfort in knowing that if another clipboard tyrant ever tries to ground someone else's life, I've got altitude and a bucket on standby. So tell me, when does protecting a community turn into controlling it, and who decides where that line sits? Have you ever stood up to a clipboard tyrant? Or been the person who just wanted peace at any cost? Share your story. Drop a comment, and if you think justice ever smelled a little like a flying compost bucket, share and pass it on.